now is not the time to be complacent. Now is the time to act with agility, speed, security, resiliency. These are all at the heart of cloud, what we're building, what we continue to build for our customers, and sensitive workloads that we work with the US government.
Hello, and welcome to Season 3 of Public Key. We have new hosts, a new look, and new amazing guests to discuss crypto and blockchain policy, financial crime, tech, and everything in between. I'm today's host, Jason Samanzato, Head of North American Public Policy here at Chainalysis. You can't go to a crypto conference in 2025 without a company or a speaker mentioning the convergence of AI and digital assets. In this episode, I sit down with Michael Greenwald, Global Head of Financial Innovation and Digital Assets at Amazon Web Service, to dive into the intricate world where digital assets meet cloud infrastructure through AWS. He discusses AWS's essential role in supporting the digital transformation in global finance, while also addressing the implementation challenges and potentials of generative AI in this evolving landscape. This episode highlights the key topics like critical transition from legacy financial systems to agile cloud-enhanced infrastructures, and the commitment of AWS in enhancing digital asset scalability, cybersecurity, and collaborations with the public and private sector. But before we jump into this episode, it's finally here, the Chainalysis 2025 Crypto Crime Report. And you can head directly to the link in the show notes to download your copy today. Our industry-leading report covers hot topics like the fact that pig butchering has grown nearly 40% year over year as the fraud industry leverages AI and increases in sophistication, and how Iranians flock to crypto amidst geopolitical tensions, while international sanctions actions disrupt Russia's war machine. There is something in the report for anyone working directly or indirectly in the crypto and blockchain industry, including compliance professionals, law enforcement, lawyers, regulators, and research analysts. Be one of the first to get your copy. And now on to our episode. Welcome everybody to Public Key. Really fortunate to be joined by Michael Greenwald from AWS. And maybe we'll just start there, Michael. AWS on a crypto podcast. One, tell us, kind of what your role is within the company, but how do you guys intersect with the crazy world of crypto that I've been working in for a while?
Sure, Jason. Great to be with you and great to be on the podcast. We sit at a unique intersection because AWS Cloud underpins central banks, our work with stablecoins like Circle and Paxos, and many of the key players in the Web3 community. So I have the great fortune in our teams, across the board that work with, great customers to see each of these buckets scale and their scope grow. In my role as the global head of digital assets, financial innovation, and overseeing the global executive relations team, we get to work with all elements of the US government. So many folks in the national security community, regulators, the federal financial, as well as our global partners and our global customers, whether that's our Five Eyes partners or our new security partners together. So it gives us a unique scope to see what's happening domestically, but also what's happening across the globe.
Yeah, that's really fascinating, right? AWS is one of those companies that probably for the people who do understand and know it, understand like how important of an infrastructure layer it is to so much of our system, both on the private sector and on the public sector. And I know we've interacted before in the past, and it's great to have somebody who's thinking so proactively around specifically the digital asset issue, which is a ton of data. As our company knows, as a data company, there's a lot of data to be maintained, but then also just in operating these networks. But I guess before we get into kind of some of the stuff specifically you're doing at the AWS, let's rewind and kind of figure out how you got here. And so maybe you can give me a little bit of your background. I know you spent some time in the government. I know you've done some unique things. I think of you myself as like one of the great conveners in the spaces that I've worked of, bringing people together to have these conversations, but love to hear how that career has developed.
Sure. Well, I love a great dinner party. And I love a great convening conversation. But I had the great fortune to spend almost 9 years of my life at the U.S. Treasury Department working on counter-terrorist financing and illicit finance. And so I got to work on the legal side, the intel side, the policy side, and the diplomatic side of the Office of Terrorism and Financial Intelligence. And some of the best years of my life, just working alongside these just great, Treasury friends around the world, and got to see the counterterrorism threat up close post 9/11 and our work that we did to go after Al Qaeda and ISIS and other foreign terrorist organizations, and also see the early days of decentralized finance. I studied Hawalas in grad school, and I was fascinated by how Hawala worked and how decentralized finance went through charities or other vehicles. And so that's what really brought me to Treasury, was to go after Al Qaeda and go after its money supply. It took me to Europe, it took me to Mali in Africa, it took me to Ukraine during, the first time in Crimea, and then it took me to the Middle East, living in Qatar and Kuwait as the first Treasury attaché there. So I saw, Jason, the arsenal and the tools of what Treasury and our partners across the U.S. government can bring. And then I also saw our limitations. I saw what it meant for correspondent banking, not just in the United States, but overseas. And then as we've picked up with decentralized finance and the speed of payments and competitiveness, I just seen the convergence of geoeconomics firsthand. And so it's given me now, being at AWS, a very unique perspective of our customer domestically and globally. So but working at Treasury was just some of the best years of my life.
And so then was it from Treasury to AWS directly, or kind of what's the path there?
So I went into the private sector. I worked for an investment firm called Tiedemann Advisors and got to work with them actually on digital assets with many family office clients and geopolitics, and understand from the investment side what was the opportunity. But a lot of it was explaining it. I was the director of digital assets, which, I kind of knew that I was going to become, just like chief AI officers, every company has one. The head of digital assets was just coming up. So it was a fascinating time to work with large institutions on Bitcoin and Ethereum and explaining that to very large investors. So I did that. I had a great fortune of going to the classroom and teaching at Boston University and Columbia, and spending a lot of time at Harvard Belfer Center. And I think gave me an opportunity, Jason, to really reflect on where we were with the future of money, where we were going. And I was able to publish quite a bit, understand and try to explain what was happening to the US dollar, which is really coming to a head right now in 2025.
Yeah, you were mentioning being back at that time when you were in the government and seeing kind of the early signs of digital asset and decentralized finance. And I have to imagine, not that you're old or anything along those lines, but just the pace of innovation over that time, that so much has changed, right? And like kind of getting up to the point that you're at today at AWS. I know one of the topics that we wanted to spend a decent amount of time on is kind of the intersection of AI and digital assets, which I think if we would have done this podcast maybe 3 or 4 years ago, would have sounded like a future world that makes no sense. And now a lot of people listening will have the context for what that means. It still feels extremely cutting edge to me. And particularly, I think of myself as just a pure consumer of what's going on in the AI space. And, I don't know, whereas I spend a lot of time in the digital asset space. So maybe give me a little framing for what are you working on at AWS about those issues? Kind of how do you think of them? What are the big projects? Give me a little bit of context around how I should be thinking about AI and digital assets together.
Sure. Well, you're right that the plumbing of our financial system is antiquated. And I saw that firsthand. I saw that when it comes to how quickly things can process. And so we're at such a unique point at AWS and in this community where you have 2 emerging technologies: digital assets, generative AI, and when they're used together to transform, for our business, public sector entities, it drives new level of efficiency and security, as well as financial innovation. And it's really a dawn of a new era of inclusion, and really, I think, a call to action for customers to have options. And so I think digital assets, innovations such as blockchain and cryptographic signatures, they're going to bolster public sector information and authenticity, and it's going to really, I would say, create tamper-resistant records for when it comes to, cybersecurity is really important for our customers. And so generative AI, Jason, and the compute power behind it, because in order for really generative AI to be unleashed, you need cloud compute. And it offers the promise of supporting digital assets, large-scale problem solving, looking for irregularities, security, identifying those emerging financial threats that are around the corner. And so that just gives you a slice of what that convergence looks like.
Yeah, let's maybe get a little bit more specific there. I remember I saw this video on YouTube recently that just walked through what the history of a derivatives exchange looked like back in the open outcry days of brokers on the floor calling out orders, paper tickets being distributed over to, a back office to execute and confirm the trades. And, we share a little bit of overlap in spending time with the CFTC, so that's why I'm talking in this language. But that pretty quickly has evolved to the point of, most all trading activity happening in a digital environment, all of that information being reported to a regulator on a daily basis with tons of information. But now we're at a period where not only is the amount of information becoming exponential as it relates to all of this, but then, also where it lives and what you can understand about what that information means is changing, and I'm talking in these kind of vague terms, but I was hoping to get pretty specific with you as to what opportunities does it specifically create, right? What does it allow the government to do, or what does it allow the private sector to do that hasn't been there before?
I think, Jason, the convergence of generative AI and digital assets, it's still early days of implementation. But I think what it could do and use cases that it will bring is a paradigm shift in global financial infrastructure. And so the infrastructure needs to be, I would say, resilient, scalable, and secure. And AWS and, Paul and I from Coinbase, we wrote a piece about how, we both support these efforts with a suite of blockchain solutions for customers. And so the infrastructure needs to be robust and it needs to be scalable in that nature. And I think advanced security features need to be continually built in, and we can't be complacent. And so those features that AWS provides, they're really an essential component of how to secure operations. And then they're integral to how public sector institutions will be looking for irregularities, whether it's the insider threat or the outsider threat, or whether it's looking at whether there could be mass exodus of payments. Those type of things are really important to train data, look for patterns, and to have a security-minded approach every day. For us, Jason, in everything we do, security is job number 1, 2, and 3. And so that's the mindset as we're going through this paradigm, as we're going through this convergence, that must stay a top priority.
I take your point that this is a kind of forward-looking exercise for you a little bit, right? You can kind of predict out that things are changing very rapidly and that you're going to see this infrastructure change. And to your point, making sure that it's secure, tamper-resistant, taking advantage of these technologies and not exposing it too much to the weaknesses. I guess at the kind of current moment we're at, though, what are some of the practical examples of, people leveraging AWS and some of this infrastructure and thinking about these problems in the future in kind of maybe the little laboratories of what is to come? What are some of those interesting examples?
Yeah, and I think laboratory is a great way to think about it. So I like that term, Jason. I'll take that from you. I think if you look at public and private sector entities, they can leverage these technologies in several ways to spot issues, monitor networks, but increasing the system uptime, right? It's all about efficiency. So decentralized applications, for example, their front-end interface, built onto smart contracts. And so they're enabling transactions to be run without sharing personal information between the parties. And you know how important and vital that is. Now, generative AI, those tools can be trained on both off-chain and on-chain data to optimize and secure that smart contract landscape. And that landscape, to your point about laboratory, it's shifting rapidly. So today, the way I think about it is generative AI, it assists smart contract parties through chatbots and virtual assistants in the writing of smart contract code and monitoring unusual networks that may represent a security risk. And a security risk of yesterday may be a growing or a different kind of security risk of tomorrow. And so what a risk is continues to grow, and we have to grow and scale with it. So I think the more data that generative AI tools can have access to, the more effectively, Jason, they can spot errors or security risks, and that can be proactive to identify and mitigate those risks in real time. And so I think we have something at Amazon called Amazon Q Developer, and that is speeding up coding tasks by providing inline code suggestions to improve developer productivity. And then in addition, for example, Amazon Q Developer, they can detect hard to find security vulnerabilities, flag emerging security vulnerabilities. And again, that flag may shift, right? It's growing so quickly. So a security vulnerability may shift rapidly. And then generative AI can generate documentation for smart contracts, make it easier to understand, and help an organization or customer make sure that it's secure.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. And it's kind of incredible that we're at this point where this is even a conversation to be had. I think I used to work at a company that developed smart contracts, and one of the, very early on in kind of the DeFi experiment. And one of the realizations I kind of came to when I was there was that the security risks were so different in that environment, right? I think if we talk about historically what cybersecurity risks, could have the biggest impact and still are those personal pieces of hey, somebody got my password, somebody infiltrated my information. So, there was a weakness in the system in that way. Where when you're coding up a smart contract to move people's money, what we've learned in the last several years, right, is that one of the biggest potential risks is that the logic of that code is wrong, or there's some unexpected outcome from that and results in the direct loss of funds. So you kind of need to build up an entire infrastructure around the idea of making sure that code's good, checking the people who are writing it to be hey, did you mean this to have this infinity loop of outcomes? And for you, is that conversion with the digital asset space just kind of where that is most naturally the right laboratory to have some of these discussions and some of this development?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. And I think especially given the recent executive order from the administration where economic competitiveness was called out. And how do you remove barriers to promote economic competitiveness? And I care a lot about economic competitiveness. And I think how can the dollar be competitive and be different in many forms? So I think that's right, Jason. I think if you look at, we're at a new dawn. And I really look at it as a paradigm shift in financial infrastructure. And in order for that shift to not just be talked about, but actually implemented in real time, that's where the convergence of digital assets and AI will bring. And I think when you bring those together and you start to play out the level of transparency, level of sources of truth, and really implement it across the public sector, that to me will be exciting. And I think especially, a huge priority for us is to prevent fraud, waste, and abuse, right? And to help organizations in the public sector do that. And I think these tools can also be very applicable when it comes to those themes.
I want to pull on a string there that you mentioned, you've brought up the executive order and the public sector here. I'm wondering, what do you think the public sector needs to understand about what is happening at that conversion point that we've been talking about? Do they need to just kind of have a lot of education on what the private sector is building? Do they need to be involved in the conversations and building next to this? How do you see the government's role vis-a-vis this kind of quickly evolving conversion of AI and digital assets?
We really focus on understanding the voice of the customer and understanding the public sector and what they're in meeting them where they are. I think folks in the national security community, they may be deeper in some areas than others and be experimenting with emerging tech in different ways. I think that both parties in the public and private sector need to work even closer because there's too much at stake. And I think when I think about economic competitiveness, I think about us spending a lot of time with our public sector customers, really trying to understand their priorities, their goals, their mission, and then help them implement. So we host a lot of gatherings where they're focused on specific thought leadership. We have one coming up in April at the Milken Center for Advancing the American Dream called U.S. Financial Intelligence. And so, for example, Jason, that's an opportunity where senior folks in the federal financial space and the national security space can come together with us and we can share best practices and we can hear each other. And I think to me, that is a great ingredient for boosting economic competitiveness and then helping the administration implement the executive order.
And how have you felt? I mean, I know you've been in conversations like that for a while. How do you feel the sophistication and understanding and like engagement level is? Has that shifted? With the introduction of a ChatGPT, was the like, okay, now we're much more engaged on these conversations? Or has it always just been like, there is a core group of people who get this and want to engage on that? I'd be interested in kind of your lay of the land around that engagement with the public sector.
Well, I think it's clear that we're in a new era for focus on the future of money. I mean, I've been focused on it for a long time. I've been passionate about it, as you know, for a long time. But I think we're at the moment where it's not just going to be a conversation. It's actually going to be real implementation. And we're seeing the future of money play out right before our eyes. So I think the executive order is a great first step. I think there's obviously a role for different parts of government. There's a role for private sector entities. And we're going to work closely. And as you know, the work we did on CFTC is a great example of that, to bring private sector companies in and to have that conversation. So I'm expecting to see true implementation. And I think that is really positive for the space. And I think everyone is getting smarter, more collegial. And I think you're going to see great collaboration. That's something that we try to foster because, as I mentioned at the beginning, because AWS Cloud underpins each bucket of the future of money, we're going to convene all of those buckets of customers together, and we're going to talk to each other. And then we're going to go to these agencies, and we're going to work collaboratively together. And to me, that will be the essence of the implementation of the future of money.
Yeah, I was wondering, and maybe you kind of already answered this, but what you see AWS's role in this, why you guys are kind of proactive in participating in these conversations and working on these projects, because in some ways I think you could be like, hey, we're an infrastructure layer, we provide our service, this is for the people building on our environments to have these conversations. But as you noted, like you kind of underpin it all, and I assume that is in part the reason that you guys are in such a good position to kind of take a leading step in this. But maybe you can give me a little bit of like your thinking and why, you guys are so focused on this issue.
We're customer obsessed and we care deeply about our customers and helping them scale on us and working with them and thinking outside the box and constantly inventing and simplifying and taking a think big mindset with our customers. So I think we want to help our customers scale. We want to help bring our customers and public sector partners together if they're not already, if we can be a helpful convener. You mentioned I like convening, and if I can convene for our customers and it helps them, then all the better. So I think also we're a company that's based on data. And so we're looking to understand not just the regulation, but what's happening to the global customer. And are we seeing customer adoption in digital assets? Are we seeing customer adoption domestically, globally? And then we're trying to really listen to the different types of customers to understand where they're going so we can meet them, so we can be supportive. And that's really part of our role, is to be supportive of our customers, whether it's in the financial sector, whether it's in the federal financial sector, whether it's stable coins, which are going to play a very important role in the coming months and years ahead, and whether it's the Web3s, companies in the startup communities, which are going to grow and scale on us. And, I've got great partners like Brad Feinstein and others that are working with the Web3 community, and we collaborate together because I may bring some public sector entity with a Web3 company and they're talking. And to me, that's healthy. And that to me just builds more trust between these different buckets in the future of money.
You were mentioning, in kind of this customer obsession, you brought up stable coins. I'm interested, maybe we can talk specifically about stable coins. Like, I'm interested in, as somebody who is at, the leading edge of what your customers want to do in these environments. Like, what are the big trends that you're focused on from a digital asset use case infrastructure perspective? Like, what is the data that, some of these customers are really focused on putting on AWS and getting insights into?
So I think, first of all, these tools, along with customer support and cloud services, which are, essential to what we do, the federal government and our partners globally, they could greatly benefit, evolving operations, countries and corporations. But really, as they're undergoing a shift. They're undergoing a transition from legacy infrastructure, Jason, to more automated infrastructure rails. And so the way I visualize it and what I hear from our customers is at the intersection of cloud computing, AI technology, and digital assets, along with data storage, with cybersecurity tools built in, that's going to define global economic competition in the 21st century. And I think the companies and the technologies that create this future, they're going to be at ground zero for helping define it. And so we, AWS, we want to be right there with our customers. The transition to automation is going to more efficiently help these processes to manage these technologies. That starts with infrastructure investments and build. And I think at the beginning and the end of the day, Jason, we're builders. We're builders at the heart of everything we do. And what I love about AWS and working here is if you have a big idea and you have the data to back it up, they will let you build it. And they'll let you build it to, whether it's to help a customer or to identify a pain point or to be proactive. And so I just love that. To wake up every day, to be able to work with a great team and to tackle big ideas. What could be better than that?
Well, you made a comment, I should have written this down, but this infrastructure that you're working on and thinking about is going to be the infrastructure of the future of how money moves, how finance gets done at a global level. I think that is, one, it's, very forward looking and I think important to kind of put out that North Star and understand hey, this is where things are going. I guess I am now also interested in what are the challenges, right? What's the really hard part of building this new infrastructure? I mean, I think people probably have some expectation, but I'd be interested of what you're seeing on the ground. What do you see as is it getting everybody aligned so that competitiveness aspect is, hey, everybody's moving towards this idea instead of on a bunch of diverging ideas, or is it something technical? I'd be interested to see where you see the roadblocks to getting to some of that future that you see.
Well, I think as the world continues globalizing trend and more people are gaining, connectivity. One of the largest challenges in the transition will be financing new infrastructures that support, telecommunications. So beyond that, it's governments and the private sector must come together very strategically to advance projects that provide smart, agile, cloud-based systems to its citizens. And so I think increasingly, if we can enable this transition from legacy infrastructure to infrastructure that will enable that next iteration of the future of money, that to me is where the competitiveness takes place. It's recognizing that now is not the time to be complacent. Now is the time to act with agility, speed, security, resiliency. These are all at the heart of cloud, what we're building, what we continue to build for our customers, and sensitive workloads that we work with the US government. And so we take that history and that practice, and as other customers globally are looking to scale, we want to help them with that transition. So I think it's just recognizing the transition needs to occur and putting in the appropriate investments in that transition.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I imagine it's a fairly big investment, right? It's quite an undertaking. Well, great. I guess, you've mentioned some things that you've been up to recently, that there's, some good articles we can probably put in the show notes or something that you've worked on. You've mentioned events you guys have coming up, but anything else on your radar that you guys have been working on or that we should be on the lookout for in the near future?
Sure. I think we are going to do Power the American Dream series with the Milken Institute, as I mentioned. And I think that's a great opportunity for interaction with public sector customers. And so I think when you look at the aspects of the American Dream, and the global American Dream, access in financial is really important. Financial inclusion is key to that. So we'll be doing that. We're going to continue to work hand in hand with our customers globally as well. We'll be at the Munich Security Forum next week. We'll be in Brussels. We'll be in London as well. So we're committed to working with not just customers domestically, but globally. And I think you're going to continue to see really a think big mindset from us in the months ahead.
Yeah, as I mentioned at the start, right? A true convener. He's out there doing lots of meetings and definitely big thoughts. Well, I really appreciated this. I think for me, it's an area that isn't always at the front of mind, and it's really fascinating to get a chance to hear about somebody who's thinking about these really big infrastructure changes that are going to be underlying kind of the future of finance. So I really appreciate you spending the time with us, Michael.
Jason, listen, thank you so much. And, I have deep respect for Chainalysis and deep respect for your team. Many are former Treasury friends, and I know you all very, very well. And I think the role that Chainalysis played is critical to the future of money. It's critical to the integrity of the financial sector. And we're lucky to have you as a customer and a partner in this effort. And I'm excited to see us together continue to scale as we see that adoption take place. So just the fact that you have been doing this podcast, educating the public, it's deeply important. And I really appreciate it. And it's really fun to be on.
No, it's great. We could do probably a whole other show on just the data that we have to put out there and integrate and get insights from with your guys' help. So, well, thanks so much, Michael, for joining us.
My pleasure.
Hey there. Thanks for listening to another episode. If you learned something new or this podcast provoked some interesting thoughts, please share it with a colleague or a friend. Your continued support is the reason we are on the top of the podcasts in the crypto compliance category. By now, everyone has heard about the single largest cryptocurrency hack in history, with North Korean hackers Lazarus Group responsible for the $1.5 billion sophisticated hack on Bybit. At the time of this recording, the Chainalysis research and investigations team have created a blog that provides a step-by-step analysis of how the Bybit exploit happened and highlighted the industry collaboration of blockchain forensic experts and law enforcement, which has already led to $40 million being recovered with the assistance of Chainalysis and our industry contacts. To see the complex web of blockchain transactions and to read detailed insights into how this hack happened, head down to the link in the show notes to read the full blog.